examples that the Bible records of those who are faithful, who have exemplified faith. And so we review our faith. Faith sanctifies, faith saves us. And then God gives us an illustration of faith in these different characters that mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. We talked about the judges, Gideon, Barak, and then Samson. We started talking about him last week, but his story is so long that we couldn't finish it up last week. And if we dealt, we could stay several weeks talking about him, but we'll finish up today. But Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32 says, "And what shall I say more? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson, of Jephthah and of David also, and Samuel and the prophets." Okay, so Samson is mentioned there. Samson, as we mentioned before, was the last of the regular judges. Samuel was considered a judge and a prophet, but Samson was the last of the pure judges. And then after Samuel came the kings and prophets. So the rulers in Israel after Samuel were kings and prophets. And so the king would rule the civil ruling, and the prophets would give the word from God. And so, but Samson was the last judge that judged Israel. And chapter 13 starts his story, and it starts with our familiar theme of when every judge comes along. It says, "And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them in the hand of the Philistines 40 years. So this was the cycle that we see over and over again. The children of Israel would sin against God, and God would deliver them in the hand of oppressors. God would come and oppress them. And they would cry to the Lord, and the Lord would rebuke them, and then the Lord would have mercy on them and send a deliverer, send a judge to deliver them from these oppressive people. And then the Lord would say, "Now obey," and they would obey for a little while. But then they would fall right back into the cycle, and they would disobey, and it would be over and over and over again. Okay, so Samson's birth was prophesied. The angel came and told them in chapter 13 about that he would be born, and they gave him instructions, his parents instructions about what to do. He would be a Nazirite, and so he couldn't eat anything that came from the grapes, anything that came from the vine, grape juice, grapes, raisins, nothing. Okay? And that was a sign of his separation, his separation to God. And then also he couldn't cut his hair. And so the angel gave them those instructions, and then they offered an offering to God. And then the prophecy was fulfilled. Samson was born. And then Samson's story, or Samson's his exploits, begin in Judges chapter 14, and we saw that God began to use Samson, but it was always in spite of himself. Samson was not faithful to the Lord, but he did trust the Lord, and his faith was, he put his faith into practice as far as when God wanted him to do something, he went out and did it, and it would have been better for him if he would have obeyed all the time and not be involved in the things that he was involved in other than that. But he began and God equipped Samson. He gave him the strength that he needed. Now, Samson didn't always have strength. He wasn't like Hercules walking around like this, and he's a big, strong guy, and you don't want to mess with him. He probably just looked like a regular guy, okay? That's what was amazing about it. This regular guy has this super strength, and so it's obviously not him. It's obviously God behind him, okay? And the faith that he exercised in God. All right. And then God showed the wickedness of the Philistines. We saw that the Philistines were wicked, and we see starting today. This is where we left off. God further shows the wickedness of the Philistines in Judges chapter 15, verse 1 through 8. We read that, you remember last time Samson went down and married this Philistine woman, and his family didn't want him to, his father didn't want him to, but God had, in spite of Samson's disobedience, God had a plan to even work through his disobedience to accomplish his will and to bring destruction to the Philistines through Samson. And then in verse 1 through 8 says, "But it came to pass within a..." hold on. Yeah, that's good. It came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a kid. That doesn't mean a child. He took a goat. Okay. And he said, I will go into my wife into the chambers. But his father would not suffer him to go in. His father-in-law. His father said, I verily thought thou hast utterly hated her. Therefore I gave her to thy companion. You know, the companion that they picked out for his wedding. She just said, well, you marry her. And he said, I gave her to thy companion. And his father-in-law said, is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. And Samson said concerning them, now I shall be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them displeasure. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put the firebrands in the midst between two tails. And then he set the firebrands on fire, and let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burnt up both the stalk and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. Then the Philistines said, who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he hath taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. And Samson said unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and went down and dwelt in the top of the rock of Ephraim. Okay, so this is the first, Samson went back to see his wife, and the father-in-law thought he didn't want her. That's because he left, and so he already gave her to be wife of somebody else. And so Samson said, okay, so now I'm going to be justified in what I do to you. That's what he said, I'm going to get you, and you're just going to be justified because you did this to me. So Samson took 300 jackals, it says in another version, and tied their tails together. Like they were like foxes type, dog kind of thing. He tied their tails together, and he put a torch or some fire between their tails and set them loose. And of course, they're running every direction, all over the place, trying to get away and get loose and everything. And they're setting all the cornfields and all the fields on fire as they go, And so Samson destroyed their crops and their flocks and everything just burned up. And the Philistines said, who in the world did that? And they said, Samson did. His father-in-law there, and they went and killed his father, burned their house down. That's the wickedness of the people there. Samson did it without his father-in-law's approval, but the people didn't care. They just were wicked, and so this just demonstrated another aspect of their wickedness for which they needed to be judged. And then the next story we see in verse 9 down through verse 17 is the story of the account of Samson killing 1,000 Philistines. And so we'll read verse 9 through 17. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? And they answered, to bind Samson are we come up, and to do to him as he hath done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock Ephraim, and said unto Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that thou hast done unto us? And he said unto them, as they did to me, even so have I done to them. And they said unto him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. And they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hands, but surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords, and brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burned with fire. It's, nothing. And his bands loosed off his hands, and he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put his hand and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heap upon heap, and with the jawbone of an ass have I slain 1,000 men. And then verse 17 says, and it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking, that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and called the place Ramah Lehi. Okay. All right, so Samson, the Philistines came up, because Samson had burned their fields. They came up and said, we're going to get that Samson. And they came up and said to the men there in the city, turn Samson over. And he goes, well, why have you come up against us? Turn Samson over. They, okay, they would probably kill all the men in the city if they didn't. So they went to Samson and said, look, we got to turn you over to them. He goes, okay, that's fine. You just promise me you won't kill me. And they go, oh no, we're not going to kill you. Just give him to them. So they did. They turned him over, and then Samson killed them all and killed those people that came up to get him. Right? And with the jawbone of an ass. And so God used Samson, even in that situation, to kill the enemy of God, to deliver the children of Israel out of the oppression from the Philistines. And so he killed 1,000 people. But not only did God miraculously use Samson, he miraculously provided for Samson. In verse 18 through 20, we read on, the story continues. It says, and he was sore athirst. He was really thirsty, in other words. Right? And called to the Lord and said, thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for thirst? And he fell into the hand of the uncircumcised. And God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water out. There came water there out. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name thereof En Hakakar, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Okay, so Samson prevailed against the enemies of God. God was using him to deliver the children of Israel out of the Philistines' hands. And so God obviously worked. Now, we notice all along the way that Samson is not doing what he's doing with the right motive. Okay? He was a man of faith. He believed God. If he didn't believe God, he wouldn't have gone up there boldly. He knew. He said, "Don't you kill me," because he knew that God's going to deliver him, and He's going to give him strength and kill him. And so he was willing to go into the mouth of the lions, in other words, because he knew God would give him strength. So he had the faith, but he didn't always have the right motives. He wasn't doing it necessarily because God told him to do it. He was doing it, he says, as they did to me, so did I to them. I was just doing to them what they did to me, And so, and you'll see that theme over and over, revenge for what they did to me, kind of thing, So his purpose wasn't always pure, but he did trust the Lord, and the Lord gave him strength. Okay? And then we come to chapter 16. In chapter 16 starts Samson's defeat. Samson was ultimately defeated because he yielded to the lusts of his flesh. Okay? But God was faithful to fulfill his promise, even though Samson was not faithful to the Lord. Okay? Samson lived for himself. He did what he did to avenge himself. He was thinking of himself. But the Lord was using him in spite of that to deliver the children of Israel. But he yielded to the lust of the flesh. And that story begins in chapter 16, verse 1 through 3 says, then went Samson to Gaza, and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, that Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay until midnight, and rose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the two posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the hill, that is before Hebron. Interesting. These the men of the city said, hey, let's get him, let's kill him. And so they waited. They probably shut the gate and locked him in and said, in the morning when he tried to get out, we're going to jump him. So they're waiting at the gate. And Sam just got up and took the gate and everything and walked away with it. It was a shock to them, I'm sure. But so God delivered Samson, even though Samson. So you think, God delivered him. What was he doing there? He went into a harlot. It's like he was sinning, but in spite of that, God was delivering. The God was delivering Israel through him. You say, well, why would God, empower somebody and strengthen somebody that was such not a non-spiritual person? God uses all of us that are not. We're not spiritual. We're not worthy. You think you're any better than Samson? You're not. If you think you are just because you don't know your own heart, we're all lustful. We're all, Samson just was able to fulfill his lust, and most of us aren't able to fulfill our lust. We might dream of having a car or whatever you do. And we dream of doing this and doing that. Samson actually did it, but we're no different. Our hearts are deceitful and lustful, and so God uses people in spite of themselves. And if God uses you, He's going to use you in spite of yourself, not because of yourself. He's not going to use you because you're such a holy person, okay? He's going to use you in spite of that. And so God used Samson in spite of it, and God got the glory from it. But Samson basically defeated himself. God had empowered Samson. The Philistines tried and tried and tried and tried and tried everything they could to defeat Samson. One man! But they could not, because the Lord empowered him. And they knew that the Lord empowered him. We can't do anything. If we go up there with 10,000 people, he's going to kill all of us, So they tried and tried every way they could. But one day, Samson sinned against God again. And this is too long past, so we won't take time to read it. But it's verse 4 through 17 of that chapter. Talks about, Samson and Delilah. And Samson went and found this woman named Delilah. He loved her, it says. And she and the Philistines came and said, find out his secret of his power. We'll give you a bunch of money. And so she's like, Samson, what is the secret of your power? Why don't you tell me? And so he told her, and he told her something. He said, tie my hands with whatever. And then she did that. And she said, the Philistines are. And he jumped up and broke the band just like nothing and went out. And then she said, you lied to me. You don't love me. Well, what do you mean you don't love you? You tried to have me killed. I told you that if you tie my hands with certain ropes, then I'll be weak. And you did it. So you said the Philistines are here. You wanted to kill me. What are you talking about? I don't love you. But every day she would, bug him every day. And finally, at the end, at the last, he told her the truth. And then when she saw that he told her the truth, in verse 18 through 21, when Delilah saw that he told her all his heart, she sent and called for the Lord of the Philistines, saying, come up to me this once, for he has shewed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought money in their hands, and she made him sleep upon her knees. She called a man and caused him to shave off 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass. And he did grind in the prison house. Okay? So Samson defeated himself. He told his secret. It wasn't a magical power. It was God's power. But the sign that God gave that he was a Nazirite and specially called and set apart to God for God's special use, the sign was that he wouldn't eat any grapes and he wouldn't cut his hair. And so he told her, if you cut my hair. And so the sign of his separation, his sanctification, his separation to God was gone. And so the Lord departed from him. And so Samson thought, nothing was changed, and he went out, and the Lord had departed from him. His power wasn't from the Lord. It wasn't from himself, it was from the Lord. And when the Lord departed from him, he had no power. So that's why I say he wasn't just macho man, in his own strength. He was probably just a regular guy. But he thought, I'll go out just like everything. The Lord's going to empower me, But he didn't, because Samson had given Delilah the secret that, he had this power because God had separated him and set him apart for this job that God had called him to. And this was a sign that he was set apart, and he dishonored that sign, and so he was captured and brought down to Gaza, and he was made to grind in the prison house. He had to probably put chains on him, and he walked around and pulled a grinding wheel like a donkey to grind corn or whatever. Okay, Samson's defeat was seen as God's defeat. Okay, in verse 22 through 24 of chapter 16, it says this: "Howbeit, the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us." Okay, so Samson's actions not only made him shame, Samson's action reflected upon his God. And they said, "Our God is strong." See, Samson's God was weak. Samson was, we defeated him, because they knew that God's power was upon him. That's why they couldn't defeat him. But they think, our God is stronger than Samson's God. He gave opportunity for his enemies to dishonor the Lord. But the hint in that verse that we read says, "Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven." So his hair started to grow long again. And so the sign of his separation to God was starting to return. And then God used Samson in a final time even though he was, in spite of the fact that he had wrong motives. In verse 25 through 30, "And it came to pass," I'll read over here, 25 through 30. "And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, they said, Call for us Samson, that he may make sport unto us." Call us Samson and let him walk around blind, and we'll go laugh at him. "Oh, look at them. Oh, the enemy, now look at him." And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport. His entertainment, in other words, he entertained them. Maybe they tripped him and he fell, and this mighty warrior, he fell. And then Samson, and they called for Samson out of the prison house, and they made him sport, and they set him between the two pillars. Okay? The prominent place in the house, I guess. And he goes on to explain some things. "And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, Suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women. And behold, Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes." And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars upon which the house stood, on which it was borne up, of the one on the right hand and on the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. And so Samson said, Lord, strengthen me this last time. Again, Samson's motive was what? That I may be avenged my eye. They put out my eye, I'm going to kill them. That wasn't what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to say, these are your enemies, Lord. They define you. They're serving these idols, and they're saying these idols are stronger than you, have defeated you, Lord. Let me do this for you. That's what he should have said. But he's like, because they took my eyes. So his motivations weren't right. But his faith was there because he prayed and he trusted the Lord. And so he said, give me the pillars. Where are the pillars? And he put his hand and he leaned upon the pillars. If he didn't think God was able to do it, he wouldn't have tried to push the pillars down. And probably the Philistines, when they saw that, look what he's doing. What's he doing? What do you think he's going to push? That's not humanly possible. These are two big pillars upon these. So it says 3,000 were on the roof. I guess a balcony type thing up there. There were 3,000 up there. looking down, probably like, an amphitheater type thing, and looking down. And these held up the whole building. So they must have been huge, huge pillars, okay? And they're probably like, look what he's trying to do. He's trying, look at him. He thinks he can knock those down. And all of a sudden, it fell down. He did, because not his own power. It was impossible for a human to move those things. But God empowered him. And so Samson, in his death, killed more people, more of the enemies of God than he did in his life. But it's such a shame. Samson was used of God in a mighty way, but what could have been if he had been faithful to God and curtailed the lust of his flesh and did what was right? It would be a different story. But he was a man of faith. He did believe God. And it says his brothers and all the house and his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, and in the burying place of Manoah, his father. And he judged Israel 20 years. So 20 years he judged Israel and defeated the Philistines. So what are a couple of lessons that we can learn from Samson's life here? First of all, God is gracious. Okay? God is gracious. No one deserves God's blessing. Manoah and his wife, couldn't have a child, but God graciously gave them a child. They didn't give it to him because they deserved it. And he didn't use Samson because Samson deserved it. Okay? God is gracious to use us in spite of the fact that we are weak. And God enables us to be powerful to accomplish his will, even though that power is not in ourselves. His grace. And so we don't deserve God's blessing. No matter what. Don't ever come to the point you think, I deserve God's blessing. Many people talk like they think God owes them something. God doesn't owe you anything. If God does anything for you, it's because of his grace. Your salvation and anything else. Don't say God owes me this. Or some people think they can command God, ridiculous. But so God, we don't deserve anything. God doesn't give us what we deserve, obviously, and that's a good thing. And that's the second point. God is merciful. He doesn't give us what we deserve. Everyone deserves God's condemnation. He doesn't give us. He gives us what we don't deserve, and he doesn't give us what we do deserve. And Samson deserved, probably judgment. He probably deserved, but God was gracious to him and used him in spite of his weakness. And so don't think that, you earned your salvation, or you earned God's favor, or you deserve, all you deserve is God's condemnation. Okay? And so God's gracious and God is merciful. Let's remember that. And Samson can teach us that. And then God can use even the weakness or the sin of men to glorify him. God can use our weakness for his glory. Romans chapter 11, verse 11 says, I say unto thee, have they stumbled at that they should fall? Have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation is come to the Gentiles, to provoke them to jealousy. So Israel rejected Christ, as we saw in Sunday school when he came. And that rejection opened the doors for the salvation of the Gentiles. Okay? Israel's rejection of their Messiah opened the door for the Gentiles to be saved. And so Israel is not guiltless because they rejected their Messiah, but as a result of their guilt and their sin, the door is open to the Gentiles for salvation. And so God can use even sin. There's nothing, in other words, there is nothing we can do to hinder or to thwart God's will. God's will be accomplished. It'll be accomplished in whatever we do. If we do wrong, then he's going to be glorified. His will is going to be accomplished. We won't reap the benefits, okay? And that's the next point in number 4 is we hurt ourselves when we don't obey God. When we don't obey God fully, we hurt ourselves. In Proverbs chapter 6, verse 27 and 28 says, can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one go into a hot coals and his feet not be burned? In other words, if you play with fire, that's you heard the phrase, don't play with fire. If you play with fire, you're going to get burned. In other words, if you disobey God, if you think that you can not listen to God and you can do what you want to do and everything will be fine, it won't. Okay? It wasn't fine with Samson. God used him in spite of his weakness, but his weakness finally is what? Destroyed his own self. And so the point is, we hurt ourselves when we don't obey God. Okay? We don't hurt God. God's will is going to be accomplished no matter what we do, even if we defy him, and God's will is accomplished. What is the, and I asked this last week, so you should remember, what is the worst thing that, any worst sin that could ever happen? What is the worst sin that's ever happened in this world? Ever, ever, ever. It is the murder of the Son of God. Jesus came and they killed him. That's the worst thing. But through that worst act that's ever happened, worst sin that's ever happened, the door of salvation was open. And so God's will was accomplished even in the most wicked act that anybody has ever done. God accomplished his will through that. So God's will be done. We can't thwart God's will, but we can hurt ourselves and not get the privilege of participating in God's will. And then number 5, we hurt God's reputation when we don't obey God. Samson gave opportunity for the Philistines to say, look at our God defeated Samson's God. Our God is stronger. And he gave opportunity for the Philistines to dishonor his God. Numbers chapter 20, verse 12 says, and the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, because ye believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. So this was Moses. Remember Moses, the children of Israel griped again and complained, we don't have any water. And so God says to Moses, speak to the rock. And Moses went up to the rock and he goes, do we have to provide everything for you? And he struck the rock, And he didn't honor the Lord in what he did. He made the Lord look weak, I guess. And so God says, because of that, you're not going to be able to enter So we hurt God's reputation when we don't obey God. It gives the enemies of God opportunity to mock God. And then finally, though God will forgive us, we cannot undo the results. We cannot always undo the results of sin. Okay? God will forgive us, but the consequences of sin, many consequences of sin, will remain. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 14, it says, howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall die. So this was David's sin with Bathsheba. Remember David sinned with Bathsheba? And God said, because you sinned with Bathsheba, and you've given great opportunity, occasion for the enemies of God to blaspheme. Shout that, Lord. Look at him. He talks about holiness and blah, 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 and he goes out and commits adultery and then kills somebody's wife, the husband so he can take his wife. Shout that. What religion is that? That he gave opportunity to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. Okay? And so the consequences of his sin, David prayed, God, don't kill this child. And God said, no, the child, as a result, will die. Okay? There's the consequences. I remember an illustration that I heard many, many, many years ago about a Christian man who, knew it was wrong to drink and to get drunk. And he went out and he got drunk. And he evidently, I think the story goes that he fell up on a railroad track and his arm was like that. And the train came in and cut his arm off. And so then, he asked God, please forgive me. I got drunk. Your word says not to do. And I did this, and please forgive me. But his arm didn't grow back. Okay? Now, God forgave him. Did God forgive him? Yeah, God forgave him of sin. If you confess our sin, God is faithful and just to forgive us sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That doesn't mean the consequences of sin will never, will be mitigated. His arm never grew back. He always had the scars of those sins. And so the consequences of Samson's sins was his death, his untimely death. I don't know when he, didn't say what age he was when he started to judge Israel, but probably about 20. And then he judged Israel for 20 years, and so he was only in his 40s probably when he died, because he didn't obey the Lord. And so the consequences are that God will forgive the sin, but the consequences will remain. So let's obey God. Let's trust God. Let's exercise faith in God, and let's obey God, no matter what the consequences are. No matter what people will be against us, but God will be for us. And so if God is for us, who can be against us? Who cares who's against us? Who cares what people think? If God approves of us, if we obey God, if everybody in the world says, you're so idiot, you stupid man, your religion, you rely on that God. I'm relying on, and people can mock and criticize and anything. But if God be for us, who can be against us? There's nobody. If God is for us, that's all that matters. Pleasing God is all that counts. And so let's take the lessons of Samson. There are some good lessons. Samson was a man of faith, surely. I mean, if he wasn't a man of faith, he wouldn't have been able to do anything. He believed that God could defeat the Philistines through him, and so he took up a jawbone of that, even though there were 1,000 people against one. He just killed all of them because he believed that God could do that. And so he had faith in God, but he had other issues, and so he should take the good example that he gives and the bad example he gives, and take both. Take caution from not being like he was in his bad aspects, but being like he was in his good aspects, trusting God in boldly accomplishing what God wants to do. No, don't fear what men think about you, or just trust God, obey God, do what God says, and God will bless you. God will use you, even if we're not perfect. God will still use us, weak vessels though we are. So let's remember Samson. Let's remember to be like him in his areas of faith, and not be like him in his areas of not curtailing his lust of his flesh. All right, let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for your goodness to us. We thank you for the lessons you taught us through Samson. We pray, Father, that you would help us to take to heart the lessons, the things that happened to him. First of all, the good things that he, by faith, was able to accomplish much for you. And he delivered Israel out of the influence of the Philistines in large part, and was able to do that because of his faith. But then he had some weakness in his life that you used him in spite of. But if he would have participated in what you would have him to do in his personal life, he would have been a greater example of faith to others around him, and to the other people, the heathen who were looking. And pray, Father, you help us to take that to heart, to help us to obey you, and rely upon you, and trust you, and have faith in you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's close by singing just the first verse of 399. I have decided to follow Jesus. This is the first verse.